Before we actually jump into perfect layers, I'd like to just go a little, give you a little, intro of what it is. Um, at its heart, perfect layers is a layered workflow solution. Currently, you can access it in Lightroom, or you can access it as a standalone product. So you can just launch the product, open up your images, and you will have robust access to these layered tools. And we gave you access to some of the most useful layered tools. This gives you the ability to blend exposures. You can create intriguing composites from several images. Take certain parts of this image and that image and composite them together. And you can mask elements from multiple photos straight into Lightroom. And we're going to, over the course of today's webinar, tomorrow's webinar, and all next week with our Perfect Layers All-Star webinars, we're going to show you a bunch of different creative ways to get the most out of perfect layers. Now, just a few finer points before we begin. This is a public preview release. We released it today to the public. We encourage you to download it. It's free of charge. Right now, not all of the features that we have that are going to be in the shipping version are there. So it's only going to get bigger and better by the time we release it. There may be some bugs and instabilities that you might find. Your feedback is critical to us. We'll show you in Perfect Layers how you can submit your feedback right within the product, and let us know if you find something, because we want to make sure that when we release it this year, it's going to be the best possible release.
Alrighty, well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm actually going to start off, and the first thing we're going to talk about is actually how to just use some of the simple blending mode options that you have inside of Perfect Layers. If you've used Photoshop for a while, you know that changing the blending modes and opacities can be a very quick and very powerful way to change the overall look and feel of your image. So I'm actually going to start out with just a single layered Photoshop file. And you've got a couple different ways that you can access Perfect Layers here inside of Lightroom. Now, if you're merging multiple files together, so let's say I have several raw files and I want to merge those all together, you would select those together. Or even if you had multiple versions of the same image, a regular image and maybe a virtual copy, you would select those and you would access it from here under the File menu. Go down to Plugin Extras and select Perfect Layers. And what that's going to do is it's going to make copies with all of your Lightroom adjustments applied to all of those images, and it's going to merge them together into one new Photoshop file. Now in this case, I already have a finished Photoshop file, and I just want to edit the original, so I'm just going to drag it down to Perfect Layers right down here in my dock, and that'll open up an existing layered Photoshop file without making a copy of it. And as
Hey,
you can
Dan,
see,
sorry to jump in there. Would you mind boosting your gain a little bit? People were
sure.
saying that you come in a bit low.
Sometimes that sets itself back down again. Yep, it did. My apologies. Hopefully that's better. All right. So here we are inside of Perfect Layers, and because for a lot of you guys this might be your first time seeing it, let me give you just a quick tour of the user interface before we actually get to work on it. Obviously in the middle you're going to see a big preview of your image. That's where the image will live. On the left there's a toolbar. We'll talk about the tools that are in it in a moment. And then on the right hand side there's a column of collapsible panes, and each pane contains different controls for working on your image. The top is a navigator. If you've ever used a navigator, it's a fairly simple concept. It gives you a bird's eye view of your image. And there's zoom presets at the bottom. There's a fit option, which will zoom to fit the entire image. There's a fill option, which is a little bit different in Perfect Layers than in most applications. It's actually designed to fill the image with whatever your selected layer is. Remember that layers can be different sizes depending on what you're working on. This will automatically zoom in to fit just the layer that's selected. It's really handy if you have a very small layer on a large canvas. It'll zoom in just to that area. And there's also presets for 100%, 50%, and 25% view as well. And you notice when we're zoomed in, you'll get a little blue box in the navigator, which you can use to move around the image. There's also a loop feature in there, so if I click on loop, it now does the opposite of a navigator. It gives me a 100%, a high detailed zoom of whatever my mouse or brush is over in the preview window. So it lets me zoom in and look at small details while being able to see the entire image at once. Below that is the layer stack. Each file that you add creates a new layer. In this case, I open an existing Photoshop file, so I actually just have the two layers that make it up, my background image and one with my name on top of it here. I can control the layer orders by dragging them around. I can double click to change the layer names, and of course I can use the little eyeball to turn layers on and off. You can also duplicate and copy and merge layers just like you're used to using. And then the ones that we're really going to focus on for this example are the blending mode and the opacity. Now with this image, right out of the gate, it's fairly flat. It doesn't really have a lot of punch or a lot of contrast to it, and it's a little light in my opinion. So I'm going to show you quickly how to enhance an image like this, give it more vibrance, more color, and a little bit darker feel to it very quickly. I'm just going to use the copy button at the bottom of the layer stack. It's going to make a copy of the image. Now it hasn't done anything visibly different yet because I've just copied the exact same layer. Now here's where the fun part comes in. By changing the blending mode, I can dramatically change the look of the image. When I click on the blending mode pop-up, I'll see the list of blending modes. We list all the ones that we think are the most common that people are going to use. We don't list every single one under the sun, but the ones we think are the most important as photographers. And now as I mouse over these, it'll actually change the preview in real time for me. So I can actually see what those different blending modes will do to my image. Now I want to darken my image, so I'm going to use the multiply, and that basically adds those two layers together and makes everything darker. Then using the opacity slider, I can control how strong that darkening effect is. And you can see how I went from day to late sunset just by adding that layer, changing the blending mode to multiply. And I can now shift the time, or basically how dark it is, just by adjusting that opacity slider in real time. In this case, I'm going to make it just a little bit darker than I actually want. I'm going to go at about 70–75%. It gives us a nice dark feel, and by darkening the image, the color becomes a lot more vivid as well. Now to bring back some contrast to it, I'm just going to duplicate that layer again. So I'll hit the copy button again. That makes another copy. Now you notice that when it copied the same blending mode and opacity. We're not going to use the same blending mode and opacity on this second layer. Instead, I'm going to change it to a different blending mode, one called overlay. Overlay adds this great rich punch to the image. It gives it more of a film look instead of a digital look. And again, with that opacity slider, I can just adjust that up or down to control how strong I want that punchy look to be. I'm going to go just a little overboard here. I'm going to keep it at about 90, just so we get a very dramatic look in that image. Now, there's all sorts of tools that I can use in Perfect Layers to actually blend these layers in and out. And we're going to talk about that in other tutorials. For this one, I'm going to keep it very simple, and I'm going to pass this back over to Brian, who's going to show you how to use virtual copies from Lightroom. Before I do that here, I'm just going to save this. I go to File and Save. It's going to save that image, and when I go back to Lightroom, we'll see how it's actually updated Lightroom, and we'll see the differences in this image. And this layered Photoshop file that I've edited here inside of Perfect Layers, I can take to Photoshop and see the exact same adjustments. There we go. We can now see how it's updated the image in Lightroom for me automatically. Alrighty, are there any questions out there before we move on?
I think we're good. I just closed my questions module, but Mike is handling them as well. I'm just going to take control right now. Let's start with Dan had mentioned that we're going to give you a look at what you can do with virtual copies in Lightroom. This is definitely one of my more favorite uses of Perfect Layers. For those of you that may not be familiar with virtual copies, in Lightroom you can essentially alias a copy of an existing image. And you can do that several ways. From the grid view, you can go to Photo and then select Create Virtual Copy, or you can use the respective hotkey, which is on a Mac, it's Command apostrophe, or on a PC, it's Control apostrophe. Now watch what happens when I do that. It creates a second copy of the image. Now what I can do here is, let's say I want to kind of, I don't know, boost the look of this image, make it a little bit more dramatic. It's very easy to do that with Perfect Layers, and I'll show you how. Let's go back to the grid view, and I'm going to go to this virtual copy over here. I'm going to go to our Develop module, just by clicking on it in the menu bar. And I'm just going to apply one of the stock Lightroom presets, just converting it to black and white. So far, nothing special. But watch what happens now. I'm going to select both of these images, and again, I'm going to go to File, Plug in Extras, and go to Perfect Layers. And now I can go to Perfect Layers over here, and you'll see that it's very familiar in terms of the interface. What I like to do when I work with Perfect Layers is I like to rename my layers so I know which one is which. This one I'll just call black and white. I can hide it, and I can call this one color. Now, one of the best ways to kind of experiment and boost the quality of an image or make it dramatic is using layer blending. You have this drop down right here, right under the layers palette called the blending drop down. And as you drop down, you'll see the blending modes that you have available. Now here's the awesome thing about our blending modes. As you hover over them, you get live previews of what that blending mode will do. And so you can easily just walk through these and find one, like overlay. I'm liking overlay, but I'll go through, I'll see what soft light does and hard light and color. So I'm going to stick with overlay. Right off the bat, this image is much, much more dramatic. And all we did was we took our single image that we had, we made a virtual copy of it, and we converted it to black and white before sending it to perfect layers. What I can do is I can control the opacity of that. Let's say it's just a bit much. You can drop the opacity. You can see if we bring it to 0, none of that layers with the blending mode appears, and at 100% the entire layer with that blending mode appears. So let's say this is great and everything. I love what it's doing with the hat and the scarf and the background. But, I'm not too keen on this, the effect it's having on her skin. Well, we've got a masking brush here. And the masking brush basically allows you to either show or hide certain parts of a layer and reveal the content of the layer beneath. So you can see if we hide this layer by hitting the little eye icon, we have natural skin tone over here. So what I like to do is with my masking brush, I make sure that my mode is set to paint out, which basically means that I'm going to be painting out from the active layer. I'm going to bring my opacity of my brush up. If my opacity is at 100%, it will remove the entire layer and reveal the color layer underneath. But that's a bit of an abrupt change for me. So I'm going to drop my opacity down probably to about, let's see, 60%. And then just start painting out. Now I have a nice feather. You can see that there are 2 circles to my brush. The inner circle is my hard edge, and the outer circle is kind of a softer edge. The transition in between is a feather, which you can control with this feather slider. So as you bring the feather to the right, you'll have more of a feather, and it'll give you more of a transition. Now, there's one thing to note. Whenever, just like any opacity slider, if you have it down at 60%, as you keep drawing, it's kind of an iterative step, meaning it's going to compound on itself. So you want to make sure that when you mask out in kind of full motions so that you don't have splotchy areas for a scene like this. So here I'm just going to kind of drop it down here and kind of get over the hat. And now we have what was right here just a kind of a flat image. We really introduced some amazing effect with our layer blending in perfect layers. Now, if again, just like Dan said, we can go to File Save to save the PSD file. We can also export. Let's say you want a JPEG or a TIFF copy. If you go to File Export, you have your options here of selecting your file format as well as the destination. So you can send it off, you can create a JPEG copy of it and then reintroduce it into your Lightroom library if you'd like. But by going to File Save, what it does is it updates the PSD file that Perfect Layers created when you first sent the image to the product, which you have here. Now, what I would like to do with my next image, this is what I wanted to show you originally, kind of this motor drive sequence. I was saying how this was the roller coaster image that I took at Universal, and I took these 4 shots. Now what I want to do is send all 4 of them, and I want to combine them. I'm going to delete this PSD file first, and I'm going to select them and just repeat the process. File, plug in extras, perfect layers. I'm glad this perfect layers dialog came up. This is really important, and I'll just really quickly say it. As you download perfect layers, when you're new to it, you'll be greeted with these slides. We really recommend that you go through it because it contains some really useful information. You can deactivate it by deselecting the checkbox to show at launch, but again, I recommend it. So here we've got our 4 layers just like we had. We've got I'm going to call this one 4th. I'm going to call this one 3rd. And I think you can see where I'm going with this one, 2nd. And then finally 1st. And I do like to rename, I try to make that a practice to rename my layers because I know instantly which one's which. So what I want to do here is I want to be able to show all 4 cars, even though it's the same exact car, but I want to make it seem like there were 4 cars on the track at once. So I can do this several ways. I'll show you the first way that I can do it. I can select my trim tool. Now this is one of when I saw this tool come into Perfect Layers, I have to tell you, this was really exciting for me because it makes it so easy to do layer masking. What the trim tool is, it's designated by this little scissor icon. You basically make a selection over a part of your layer that you want to keep. So here, I want to keep this car. I want to get rid of everything else. So by making this selection, I'm able to refine it. I can make it larger or smaller, and I can reposition it. When I'm done with the selection, all I need to do is hit my Enter or my Return key, and it masks out everything but what I protected. You can see if we go to the Show Mask dropdown, you can see an overlay of the mask. You can see it on white, and then you can see it on grayscale. So everything that's black right now is hidden, and the only thing that's being shown is that box in white. I can continue on with this. So now I'm on my third layer here. I'll show you a different way to mask in. We can select our masking brush, and just like before, I'm going to set my opacity to 100%. I'm going to increase my brush size using the same shortcut keys that you're used to. I'm just using the brackets left and right. And now I can mask in a totally different way this second car. If I turn on the fourth layer, that fourth car is there. And now we just repeat the process. This time, I'm just going to protect that second car and reveal this first car. So I'm going to use my trim tool because I really do enjoy it. I'm going to kind of just make this quick selection here and hit Enter. Now we've got the two cars. Add the third one, add the fourth one. I'm going to save this right now. And let's say you want to do something like a finer selection, or you want to add a certain type of, like a radial blur, for instance. I've got my image right here. If I happen to have a copy of Photoshop, I could send it to Photoshop as well to make finer adjustments. And you can see the wonderful thing is it retains all of my layer titles. It retains the masks that I've created. And so let's say I want to add something here, or if I want to use Mask Pro to get rid of the sky and add a better sky, I can do that right now. So that's just another way that you can use Perfect Layers in conjunction with your other Perfect Photo Suite tools. So with that, Dan, I'm going to volley it back to you. If you want to just show them another example, I'm sure everyone would really appreciate it.
Sure, we can definitely do that. Go ahead and just let me show my screen here. All right, so in the last couple of examples we've shown, we've kind of worked with some existing files. I want to actually show you where we're actually going to merge a bunch of different images together. This will be kind of like what Brian did, but in this case we're just going to be using blending modes to combine multiple images together. Now, if you're a commercial photographer, or if you worked in a studio, and if you've ever photographed small objects, things like jewelry and watches, you know it can be very difficult to get the correct lighting on such a small subject, especially when it requires multiple lights. So a trick is to actually photograph the image multiple times with the lights pointed at different parts of the image and then combine them together. Now, you could take that same trick and apply it if you don't have a whole lot of lights in your studio. So what I'm going to show you guys how to do is actually how to create what looks like a professionally shot image, something that would have been shot in a studio with multiple lights, by using just one single light. So I've photographed this microphone. I'm just going to show you a base image of it. And I actually have 7 different variations where the light is aimed at different parts of the microphone. And I'm going to show you how to combine all of those together to create one finished image. So here in Lightroom, I'm just going to select the 7 images that I want to use. We'll go up to the Plugin Extras menu and select Perfect Layers. It's now going to send those to Perfect Layers, and each one of those is going to create a new layer in our finished file. So down here in Perfect Layers, you'll notice how our layer stack has all 7 of those in it. I'm just going to start by turning all of these layers off, and we're going to start at the bottom of our layer stack. Our very bottom layer, the first image that we brought in, is actually one where the light is aimed at the background. The background is just a blue wall, and it gives us kind of this nice glow in the background. If we go up to the next layer, it's actually a side light. The light is aimed towards the side of this microphone, so it kind of gives it this nice dramatic look. What we want to do is figure out how are we going to combine those two images together. I want to get the light from both of those. I want the background and the side light together. Well, there's a handy blending mode called lighten, and it basically takes the lighter part of those two layers and puts them together. And if you're working in a darkened studio, it's an easy way to combine multiple light sources together. So I'm just going to change my blending mode from normal to lighten. There we go. And you can see how it's now combined those two different light sources together. And now by adjusting the opacity of each layer, I can effectively control how strong each light is after the fact. Think how cool this is. You can create multiple different lighting scenarios just by changing layer opacities. Let me show you. If I grab this opacity slider and I drag it down, you can see how I can turn that light on or off or control just how strong I want it to be. It gives you ultimate control after you've made the shot. So you could even offer your client several different lighting variations if you wanted to. I'm going to keep this one way up high at 100%. And let's go to the next layer. I'm going to turn it on and let's look at it. All right, so this shot or this exposure was aimed straight down from the top, and it's designed to add a little sparkle to the mesh on the top of the microphone. Again, we'll follow that same trick. I just select the layer and I change it to lighten. There we go. You can see how that's now added that nice sparkle on the top of the microphone. It's also added a little light over here to the side. Let's just continue up our stack here. I'm going to turn another layer on. This one is the first one that you saw. It's the main light. This is the one that's aimed directly at the front of it. This is what really gives it the shape, that three-dimensional shape. We'll change the blending mode to lighten. Now that one's a little too bright at my taste, so I'm just going to use the opacity slider, and I can just reduce that down to determine just how bright I want it to be. You guys following along here? Let's go up to the next layer. The next layer is what we call a fill light. In this case, it's a very soft overall light. It's not bright on any part of the image. It's just used to soften some of the deep shadows underneath the microphone. We'll turn that to lighten as well. There we go. I'm just going to turn that layer on and off so you can kind of see what that does. It's just a little bit of a fill light. It just lightens up the base and adds a little bit of a specular highlight along the side. All right, we've only got a couple more here to go. Let me turn the next layer on. Now the next layer is a little bit odd. If you notice, it's completely black. All we see is a red dot in the middle. Let me turn this off for a second. I'll explain what we did. On this microphone, there's a red LED right in the middle of it. When it has power, that red LED lights up. Now, if I have the red LED on for every one of these shots, when I combine them all together, that's just going to be a big white blob in the middle. It's going to be really overexposed. So what we did is we unplugged the microphone when we photographed all of the shots except for this one. This one we plugged it in. The other benefit that this gives us is in order to get that red light to turn on, the microphone has to be plugged in, which means there's an ugly cord hanging out of the bottom of it. We don't want to see that. So by having it unplugged for all the shots except for this one, we don't have the ugly cord, and I can control the brightness of that LED on its own. And now if we change the blending mode to lighten, ta-da, we get the little red LED in the middle, just the intensity that we want. And I can control how bright that is just by turning it on or off, and again by adjusting its opacity. I can get just the right red on that particular layer. Now the last one on the very top is a special effect. So at this point, this would be a great shot I could give to a client and they'd be happy with it. But I've also added another option for them. I've added what I call a fuzzer. We just put some diffusion over the lens of the camera and photograph with the light pointed at the top of the microphone. Anything that is bright in the scene when there's diffusion over the lens is going to cause it to flare. So we get this soft, dreamy feeling. Again, change the blending mode to lighten. There we go. We can see that fuzz. Now, if you look carefully, I actually made a little mistake. I bumped the camera when I was putting my diffusion filter on it. So I'm just going to use the move tool, and I'm just going to move that layer and line it up where I want it to be on my shot. There we go. That's better. And with the opacity slider, I can control how strong that little layer of fuzz is. I like it pretty bright. And I can use the masking brush to blend any of these layers anymore. I actually want to make sure that fuzz is just on the top of the microphone. So I'll grab my masking brush. I make sure it's set to paint out. And now I'm just going to brush right here along the edge to remove a little bit of fuzz that I didn't want right there. There we go. When I'm ready, I'm just going to go up to Save. It's going to save that layered Photoshop file. It's going to go back to Lightroom, and there'll be a copy that we can look at. There we go. We can see there's that new image that it created. It's a Photoshop file where the rest of them happen to be JPEGs, but they could have been RAW files as well. And there's our finished layered Photoshop file. All right. Any questions out there, Brian?
No, actually, I think some people really dig that. That's the kind of technique, Dan. It's so accessible because Dan just used this, $3 flashlight. But if you're the kind of person that sells a lot of stuff, say on eBay or on Craigslist, these little things, just by getting different images with the directionality of the light different and blending it in with perfect layers will make it that much more appealing to potential buyers because this looks like a really nice commercial shot. So thanks for that, Dan.
Yeah, and that's a good point that I failed to make. This wasn't photographed in a expensive studio with thousands of dollars worth of lights. This was all photographed in just a plain dark room that happened to have a blue wall, and I used literally a little $3 flashlight that uses two AA batteries. Nothing fancy. You could get it at Home Depot. You probably have one laying in your kitchen somewhere.
Yep. And so it's just a matter of seeing it and knowing that perfect layers now, this is what you can do, and this is why I'm really excited to show these webinars. So with that, what I'm gonna do, my friends, is take back control, and I'm just gonna close this questions module, show my screen, and then just finish it up. I want to give you some more information and recap a little bit about perfect layers. So again, perfect layers is a public preview release, the version that we released today. Not all of the features again are included yet. We have some great stuff coming in the shipping version, so keep an eye out for that. Second bullet point, look, on live TV sometimes we encounter bugs, and that's fine. That's the nature of the beast. Actually, that reminds me, I'm going to jump out really quickly because I want to show you. Let's send these again to perfect layers, and I want to show you. Dan, I don't think you showed the feedback, did you? You may not have. All right, so here's perfect layers. This is the public preview release that you guys have. If there's something that you want us to know about, there's a bug you encountered or feature, or just something that you want to tell us about perfect layers, if you go to the help menu, there's a link that says provide feedback. This will launch your default email program with an email ready to go. It'll be addressed to us with a subject that we will recognize. So we really, really would love it if you could, just send us your feedback. Another thing, this release expires on June 30th, 2011. Dan and I put together some fantastic use case videos. If you go to onOnesoftware.com, you can watch them to see different ways to use perfect layers. If you don't have a copy of perfect layers, there's no reason to wait anymore. You can go to onOnesoftware.com. You can download your copy and play around with it. Again, it's a standalone product, and it works directly in Lightroom. Aperture support is coming. So I mentioned at the head of the webinar that Dan and I are going to be doing an encore of this webinar tomorrow. And then next week, I'm really, really excited. We've got the Perfect Layers All-Star Week coming up. We've got Dave Cross, R.C. Concepcion, Frank Salas, Seth Resnick. They're all getting together, and they're going to show you how they use Perfect Layers in their workflow. I'm really excited for it, and I encourage you to go to onOnesoftware.com/webinars. Register, check it out. You will not want to miss it. If you do miss it, though, there are 3 ways that you can watch it. You can watch all of the webinars by going to our onOne University page. You can stream it from that website. You can go to our iTunes podcast channel, again, and download those podcast videos locally. Or you can go to our onOne University YouTube channel. Another cool thing about YouTube is if you have one of those set-top boxes or PlayStation, I think, or anything that connects to the internet that connects to your television, you can watch the webinars on your TV while having your laptop, and you could work alongside it. So that's kind of cool. We want to make sure that the webinar programs are most accessible to you guys. This is my email address. If you have any questions, if maybe there was a question you didn't get to, email it to me. I'd be more than happy to get you an answer. And then we're also on Facebook and Twitter. Those are our social media channels, and we welcome you to follow us there. We give a lot of really cool kind of specific information on each channel, so definitely check us out. On behalf of my colleague Dan, if you want to say thanks.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. I do have a couple questions that have popped up that I wanted to answer for everybody if we have a second.
Sure, of course.
First one is if you already own the Perfect Photo Suite or Plugin Suite 5.5, the current version, you actually get Perfect Layers for free when the final version ships. So hooray for that. Another question is the current public preview doesn't include the conduit to talk to Aperture, but that doesn't mean you can't use it in Aperture right away. In Aperture, you can just set it up as your external editor. So you can actually start to use and experiment with it. You'll just right-click and say Edit with Perfect Layers instead. I think that was the questions.
Actually, that's a really cool tidbit about Aperture. See, even the curriculum and education manager isn't above learning something new. So again, thank you everyone. Dan, thanks for your help, and I look forward to seeing if you want to catch another version of this tomorrow. Join us, and I'll see you then. All right, everyone, have a great day. Bye bye.